Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers. The first married a woman and died childless. Then the second and the third married her, and so in the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now God is God not of the dead, but of the living, for to God all of them are alive. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
40 years ago today, one of my important mentors, Pastor Pete Rudowski, did something that I was told he had never done before. He set aside his carefully prepared sermon. He was a manuscript preacher like I am, so everything is written out. And he preached something different because there was something happening in that congregation right at that moment that he needed to address. A young man in the congregation was lying in that thin space between death and life. And that's not an easy thing for us to face. He felt like he needed to preach in a way that would help the congregation come to terms with why this was happening. So I am doing that same thing today. I had a lovely sermon prepared, carefully crafted, my usual 3 pages, double-spaced, 14-point. But I had struggled all week with which direction to take. And I had decided that I was going to do the safe one, so that's what was prepared. But on my way this morning, I decided that I actually needed to tell the hard story. Because that young man was my first husband. Now, I have to give a disclaimer. The reason I was not choosing to tell the story is that there's a fine line for a preacher between making the sermon about herself and making it something for all God's people. But I think you will find that this is indeed for all God's people. The reason that this seemed like such a good week to tell this very personal story and tell why it shows that God is present with us is that we heard from Job for our first reading. Thank you, Jean, for that. And that same pastor, Pete Rudowski, preached a memorial service sermon 3 days later, and he based it on Job, on a blameless man having all these terrible things happen to him. Job. Then, of course, we have the widow. That's kind of thinking about widows. When I finish, we'll sing a hymn that is based on that reading from Job. I know that my Redeemer lives. And that's a hymn that became very important to me as I walked through these few days while my husband stayed in this liminal space between death and life. And we sang it at his funeral. Finally, this is the very date when the car accident happened that caused him to be here. So, you see, it seemed like I was meant to tell this story, not the other one that I had planned. So, he was a football fan of Miami University, from which he had graduated only 5 or 6 years earlier than this event happened, and he was at a football game. And it was actually, the weather was kind of like it has been for the last couple of days, rainy and dreary, and he was driving home. And a car coming the other direction lost control and collided with him. It was terrible. He was air flighted to UC Hospital from US 27 out there. Be careful going home. They kept him alive for 2 days until they finally came to me and said, he is brain dead. He is only being kept alive by this breathing machine. So we recommend that it's time that he no longer be on this earth. 26 years old. We had been married for less than a year. So here's the part of the story that was going to be in the sermon that I wrote. We had to decide then, I'll make all the arrangements that you do. We were going to put him in a casket to be buried, and typically you choose a suit, right? You choose somebody's best clothes to put them in. Well, he had been an avid golfer. And now this next part, theologically, I would cringe. But if you came to me and said you wanted to do this because it really was going to give you comfort, I would say, go for it. He was buried in his golfing outfit with his putter and some balls, because I said, for this person, surely heaven will include beautiful fairways. And how could I send him off without being prepared? Again, now that I have a Master of Divinity and I am an experienced pastor, I know that that's not really the way we think about things. But what was important in that moment, and what's important when you come to me and tell me the things that will give you comfort, is that it gave me comfort and it hurt nothing. So we did that. We buried him. I was 25 years old and a widow. It was a strange place to be. It was a very difficult place. But, and here is the point, God's people surrounded me. God's people never left me alone. A couple of them are in this room here, people who were at Good Shepherd at that time. I knew every Sunday when I came that they would be holding me up. I had one elderly woman who was kind of a crotchety person, no names. She came to me one day after worship and said, I am so glad that I saw you crying. She had buried 2 husbands. She said, I never saw you cry, and it made me so worried. And the fact, I didn't care whether I had cried or not. The fact that here are God's people surrounding me, God's people surrounded me in my personal life. People came and asked me to have dinner. My family members would come for unplanned visits. God's people surrounded me, held me in that love, made sure that I knew that Jesus is always in the room. And so that's why we tell this story. I told Jeff to stop me if I went on too long. I have a feeling I told it fairly quickly, so this may end up being shorter than it had planned. Another day, I'll tell you the beautiful story of the two baskets and how we live in one basket and beautiful things are outside of it. They're always there. Again, point being, God is with us. No matter what, no matter how hard things seem, no matter how wonderful things are, God is present. God's love surrounds us. And there is not a thing that can happen on this earth that will change that. Thanks be to God. Thank you for listening to this story. Amen.